Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is 3:32 Central Time, 4:42 Eastern Time. Good morning, good morning. About to read about John Mcelhenney, John Mcelhenney, the Apostle of Western Virginia. Looks like he was born in South Carolina in 1781. 1781. All right. John Mcelhenney, the Apostle of West Virginia, chapter 45 of Southern Presbyterian Leaders, 1683 to 1911, says, in the month of March, 1808, a tall, slender young man with long, oval face, clear blue eyes, and a nose like the eagle's beak rode through the passes of the central Allegheny Range and entered the wide upland region now called Monroe County in Western Virginia. In the first house in which he sought shelter, the young man preached a sermon. The journey was again taken up, and in the courthouse in the little town of Union, the young preacher delivered his gospel message. He then pressed northward across the beautiful mountain stream known as Greenbrier River, and his voice was next heard preaching the gospel in the town of Lewisburg in the county of Greenbrier. The preacher continued his journey westward, delivering the gospel message at various points in the uh, Kana- Kanawha Valley, even as far as the Ohio River. Turning eastward again, he rode through the mountains to the Valley of Virginia to sit with his brethren of the Lexington Presbytery and the old Timber Ridge Church. With their consent, he came once more to the Greenbrier County, and on the first Sunday in June 1808, preached again in the stone church at Lewisburg. In this manner began the work of John Mcelhenney as shepherd of the two flocks at Lewisburg and Union. John Mcelhenney was born in the Waxhaws community, South Carolina, 1781. His father was a Scot from Ireland who bore an honorable part in that war of the Revolution and died when John was an infant. An elder brother, James Mcelhenney, took charge of John's education. The latter sat at the feet of James Hall of North Carolina and of James Gilliland, pastor and teacher at Nazareth Church, South Carolina. And Gillian's school, Samuel B. Wilson, afterwards pastor at Fredericksburg, Virginia, was a fellow student with John Mcelhenney. Excuse me. When Mcelhenney turned his steps towards Yale College, he found that school closed by reason of an epidemic of yellow fever. In 1802, therefore, he joined his schoolmate Samuel B. Wilson at Washington Academy in Virginia. Excuse me. For the space of 6 years, he studied Greek and Latin under Daniel Blaine and the Bible and theology under President George A. Baxter. In February 1808, Lexington Presbytery laid hands upon the head of Mcelhenney and bade him cross the mountains into the valley of the Greenbrier. In that journey, we have already followed him to the stone church at Lewisburg. There, in the summer of 1809, Dr. Baxter delivered one of his solemn discourses and formally installed Mcelhenney in the office of pastor. About the same time, the elder brother, James Mcelhenney, became pastor of the Old Stone Church near the present Clemson College in South Carolina, and there in 1812 he passed away. His youngest daughter, Emily, became the mother of the Southern poet Paul H. Hayne. The region in which John Mcelhenney became pastor was at first a part of Augusta County, Virginia. About the year of 1751, John Lewis and his son Andrew set forth from the valley of Virginia to explore the country west of the mountains. On the bank of a clear stream, John Lewis became entangled in a thicket of vines. Let's see. Some members of the Anderson family removed from the neighborhood of the Stone Church, Augusta County, Virginia, to the present Pendleton County, South Carolina. In the latter place, about the year 1802, they helped to build the Stone Church, of which James Mcelhenney was pastor. Perhaps they carried with them from Augusta the idea of a sanctuary built of stone. See page 248. So, on the bank of a clear stream, John Lewis became entangled in a thicket of vines. For this reason, he named the stream Greenbrier River. Soon afterward, a number of Scottish Irish families removed from the valley and built homes near this river. Among the early settlers were the families of McClanachan, Stewart, Arbuckle, Withrow, Gibson, Rennick, McClure, Matthews, Irwin, Hunter, Anderson, and others. For protection against the Indians, a fort was built and named Camp Union. Excuse me. From this fort, as we have already seen, General Andrew Lewis set forth in the fall of 1774 to deliver battle against the Indians at Point Pleasant. In the army of Lewis, there were 2 companies of riflemen from the settlements on the Greenbrier, led by Robert McClanachan and John Stewart. In 1777, a county was laid off and named Greenbrier after the river. Scotch-Irish settlers from Augusta County continued to pour in, and Camp Union received the name Lewisburg in honor of Andrew Lewis. Colonel John Stewart built a house of stone on the main street of the town and assigned it to the county to be used as a courthouse. In 1796, Colonel Stewart and his wife, Agatha, a daughter of Thomas Lewis, erected in Lewisburg at their own expense the stone church, which is still standing in all of its original strength. It was a square structure of gray limestone with a sounding board hung above the pulpit. The gallery was reserved for the colored people. John Mcelhenney's field of labor extended from the summit of the Alleghanies to the Ohio River, a region embracing the chief part of the present Commonwealth of West Virginia. John McHugh of Augusta County had founded the 3 churches of Lewisburg, Spring Creek, and Union, and Benjamin Grigsby of Augusta was their next shepherd. Mcelhenney took charge of these 3 flocks, and after the space of more than 62 years under his pastorate, the number of members had become a multitude. At the morning hour on Sunday, he would preach to the flock at Lewisburg. After the sermon, he would mount his faithful horse and ride at a steady pace to Union, 20 miles away. There he would preach at the close of the same day to the members of his second flock. Side journeys in great number were made by this apostle on horseback. Over great mountains and through deep, swift mountain streams, he urged his horse in the work of planting new churches. Through his own preaching and through the work of men trained by him, congregations were organized at Parkersburg, Tygarts Valley, Point Pleasant, Charleston, the present capital of the state, and also near the headwaters of the Greenbrier. In the manner he claimed for Presbyterianism, the entire region of West Virginia. In autumn of 1808, 6 months after the first entrance into the Greenbrier Valley, the pastor of the church established a school under the shadow of the stone sanctuary at Lewisburg. For many years, Dr. Mcelhenney himself was the principal teacher. Afterwards, he committed the school unto faithful men who continued the good work. From the academy came forth many who have rendered great service among their countrymen. Lawyers, physicians, merchants, and ministers were trained by Mcelhenney. Among the preachers who sat at his feet in the schoolroom were Dr. Henry Ruffner, president of Washington College in Virginia, and Dr. William S. Plumer. In 1838, churches established by Mcelhenney and his helpers had grown so numerous that they were formed into the separate presbytery of Greenbrier. His work widened with the passing of the years. His labors at home were abundant, for he owned a small tract of land and became the best farmer in that region. He was a fine judge of horses and also a good horseman, and seemed never to grow weary as he urged his steed across the breezy uplands. He was up, quote, at 6 in the morning, riding or walking over the farm, writes his granddaughter, Rose W. Fry, quote, in his study by 9 o'clock, writing or meditating, on horseback again after an early dinner, visiting the sick, or riding to fill an appointment, end quote. And in all and in all the South in that day, no man rode and preached more than John Mcelhenney. Quote, he appears to be ever in a hurry to do good, quote, writes one who knew him. Quote, he has been in a hurry all his life. He has no time for elegant circumlocutions. As soon as his message is delivered, he is in motion again to deliver his message somewhere else. He is the very personification of motion. He is a striking example of how much a man can do who does it with all his might, end quote. He preached with power and in great tenderness of spirit. His voice was musical and his eyes was piercing in its look. The love of a great heart was ever ready to respond to the call of any member of his flock. For miles and miles in every direction throughout a wide region, all men knew that good gray head, and all loved him. On the 5th of June, 1858, Dr. McKinney stood up in the old stone church to deliver a sermon in commemoration of 50 years of labor as minister in that field. During that period, he had preached sermons to the number of nearly 8,000, administered the rite of baptism 1,300 times, and united marriage bond as many as 1,500 couples. Quote, as to the number of times, and quote, he said, quote, that I have administered the sacrament of the Lord's Supper and the address and exhortations I have delivered, I can form no idea. During the later years of his ministry, an associate pastor labored by his side, at first Dr. J.C. Barr, Barr, and then Dr. Matthew L. Lacey. At last, in the year of 1871, the silver cord was loosed, and the faithful man of God, the patriarch among his people, having reached well nigh the age of 90 years old, was gathered unto his fathers. In a grove of oak trees by the side of the roadway that leads from Lewisburg to Union stands a small church called Salem. All that fair upland region of field and forest slopes gently to the southern bank of the Greenbrier. The soil is fertile, and every summer the ripening harvests seem to change the fields into meadows of gold. The sons and daughters of Scotland have entered this region in such great numbers that the district near the river has been called from the earliest days the Scotch-Irish corner. Under the shadow of Salem, the quiet house of God, frequented by these Scots, the writer of this present volume spent the years of his childhood within that period when the apostolic Mcelhenney was nearing the end of his pilgrimage. Even now, this writer recalls the fragrance of the memory that Dr. Mcelhenney left behind him among the Scots, who, with their children, still worship at Salem. And not at Salem alone, but in every congregation like unto it, in all the region of Western Virginia, wherever the Scots continue to dwell, among whom Dr. Mcelhenney labored as messenger of peace and salvation. His memory abides as an inspiration unto every good work and work. Dr. Mcelhenney is the greatest man I ever knew in the ministry, wrote Dr. Stuart Robertson of Louisville. Quote, great, I mean, with the greatness of action and faith, fullness in the master's work, end quote. Very interesting. Chapter 46, William Swan Plumer, preacher and teacher of the word. A town now called Darlington in Pennsylvania was the birthplace of William Swan Plumer, 1802. Scotch courage and persistence carried him through many strenuous days as youth and young man. When Plumer was about 19 years of age, he walked over the mountains from Charleston on the Kanawha River to Lewisburg in Greenbrier, Virginia, to become a pupil to Dr. Mcelhenney's academy. Dr. Plumer afterwards referred in the following terms to his first glimpse of that beautiful town that nestles amidst the hills of Greenbrier. Quote, many years ago, end quote, he said, when I first came late on a Saturday afternoon to the brow of the western hill, overlooking the village. I thought from the noise that reached my ear that Lewisburg must be a busy manufacturing town. But when I came down into its streets, I found that it was only the servants in the backyards chopping wood for Sunday. Young Plumer was received with open arms by Dr. Mcelhenney. Since he was one of the oldest students in the academy, Plumer was called Daddy. He was even then tall and strong, had fine black eyes, and was dignified in manner. We are told that he made rapid progress in the study of the ancient languages and that he was in the habit of working at his task in the open air, perched upon a woodpile near the academy building. He entertained a great affection for his instructor, whom he called Father Mcelhenney. This love was returned by the teacher, who always addressed Plumer, the most promising pupil in his school, as Dear William. It's pleasant. From the academy, Plumer passed on to Washington College to sit at the feet of the inspiring teacher, Dr. Baxter. Then, in the autumn of 1824, he entered Princeton Seminary. 2 years later, 1826, he was licensed to preach. The church which he organized at Danville, Virginia, and another organized at Washington, North Carolina, were the first fruits of his ministry. A short pastorate at Briery Church, Prince Edward County, Virginia, was followed by a call to Petersburg. 3 years later, 1834, he became shepherd of the First Church, Richmond, and there he remained for more than 12 years. William S. Plumer was preeminent. As a preacher of the gospel, in height he stood a head and shoulders above his brethren. His step was slow and measured, and his majestic presence in the pulpit impressed all beholders with the ideas of strength and dignity. Dr. Moses D. Hodge writes of him as follows, quote, "His prayers were the tender pleadings of a soul in communion with God. There was a pathetic tremolo in his tone as he read the hymns for the day. He occasionally prefaced the announcement of his text with some striking remark, arresting the attention of his entire audience. His voice was of great flexibility and power. Its cadences varied with the sentiments which filled his mind and heart. When the thought was tender, the expression of it came in accents soft and low. The words fell like the dropping of tears. In the utterance of some sublime and stirring thought, his voice rang out like the sound of a trumpet. These transitions at times were abrupt and startling as a bugle call to battle. Nervous persons were occasionally agitated by them. His audiences generally were aroused and impressed by them. In the fullness of his strength in middle life, he could have filled a great cathedral with the melodious thunder of his marvelous voice. One Sunday in the summer of 1860, Dr. Plumer to the guest at the Wild Sulphur Springs in Virginia. It was a time of excitement, and the band of music at the resort often played the patriotic melody of the French people, the Marseillaise hymn. The preacher therefore arose and said to his audience in his deep, rich voice, quote, "Let us begin the worship of God by singing the Marseillaise hymn of the Christian church. All hail the power of Jesus' name." The reverential attention which was thus gained was held by the minister to the very close of the service. The church of which he was pastor in Richmond was rapidly built up in numbers and in spiritual influence. Plumer's great heart was full of love for his fellowmen, and with joy he called them into God's kingdom. Multitudes heard him and obeyed his call throughout our whole land. Wherever he journeyed, crowds came to hear the gospel of love and truth as it fell from his inspired lips. He was full of the highest courage in meeting his duties as pastor. Face to face, he talked in all plainness and sincerity with wicked and profane persons. His heart bled for the poor and afflicted. Words of sympathy spoken by his lips seemed to find their way at once into the hearts of those afflicted with sorrow. Very nice, very nice. I'm going to go ahead and hold up right there, page 288. Page 288, February 15th, 2022, paragraph 2. There we go. All right, cool. I'm going to go over to the house for a little while and chill. I'll be back on at 7. So in about almost 3 hours for our morning Bible reading. Okay, see you guys later. Thanks for tuning in.